Everybody take a seat, please. All right, we'll come back to order and we'll have another roll call.
Councilmember Martner?
Present.
Councilmember Costa?
Present.
Councilmember Lingle?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Starbuck?
Present.
Mayor John Lynn?
Here. Okay, oral communications, your opportunity to talk to us for 5 minutes about something that's not on the agenda. See, yep, there we go. Come on down.
Hi, my name is Robert Schmedicke, and I recently drove through something they call a turnabout out on Highway, 246, on the way to Solvang. Whoever designed that should tell their spouse that the spouse is married beneath themselves. How can you take a traffic circle, put it out in the middle of farm country, and expect it not to create more accidents in that area? I just have this vision of somebody driving along half asleep one night, coming to the traffic circle at 55 miles an hour, and using it for an acceleration ramp as they go up over the top of this thing. This is the dumbest idea I've seen in a long... Who invented this? Joni Gray? I don't know. It's a bad idea. I don't know how you're going to say... Maybe if you light it and put up warning signs till people get there. That is my bone to pick with design in the county of Santa Barbara. Thank you.
You'll be happy to know that this council sent a letter of objection. The Buellton City Council sent a letter of objection. Joni Gray sent a letter of objection. Two assemblymen and 2 senators, and Caltrans is in a world of its own. That's all I can tell you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no one rise, we'll close and come back. I have 2 things that are going to be adding to the agenda. First, I have a little brief report from Chief Dabney with regard to some burglary issues we've had and some good news.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. As you get the weekly updates from our department, it was brought to my attention that this should be discussed or brought to the attention in an open session. But as you recall, in late January, we stood before the council and we advised you that violent crimes such as aggravated assault and robbery were significantly down, over 50%. That continues. Our latest statistics for 2012 show, as you recall, we were criticized in the media because sexual assault was up by a raw number of 6, which constituted a 28% increase. I'm happy to say that sexual assault has an 87% decrease, which consists of a difference of 4. So as Mark Twain once said, there are lies, there are damn lies, and then there are statistics. So keeping in that vein, we also told the council that we are seeing in all jurisdictions statewide, and I would assume nationwide, but at least within the Central Coast, are seeing an increase in property crimes consisting of theft and burglary. So our department has been very open about this, and we've had public meetings about this. We are encouraging residents to, be vigilant of their neighborhoods, to not store property in their unlocked vehicles or in plain view, just because there's several factors. There's the economy. You're going to receive a briefing next week from Captain Ralston on the AB 109 realignment, that population in our community. So we continue to raise awareness with regard to property crime, and not just raise awareness. We want to do something proactive about it. So we have had a limited amount of grant funding available so that we've been able to put plainclothes officers out on the street. to look for daytime burglaries, nighttime burglaries, and different methods, different forms. Sometimes they're on bicycles, sometimes they're on foot, sometimes they're in cars. And two incidents that have occurred over the past month, one on Tuesday, March 20th, we arrested a young man for commercial burglary, vehicle theft, and residential burglary. He was actually driving the vehicle that he had stolen. And we believe that that individual was responsible for about 8 to 10 other burglaries within our community. And as typically happens with someone involved in that type of crime, you don't just have one burglary and one burglar. Usually it's a burglar who's going to commit as many burglaries as he or she can to gain as much property as they can. And then last week, two of our officers assigned to the grant-funded burglary suppression patrols contacted an individual known to be involved in local residential burglaries and vehicle burglaries. And through their investigation, they were able to get with our detectives and obtain search warrants for two stash houses. Two more people were arrested at those locations. And after the execution of search warrants, stolen property consisting of electronic equipment, power tools, jewelry, and other items were recovered and identified by the victims of the thefts. Charges for these arrestees included being under the influence of a controlled substance, possession of a controlled substance, possession of stolen property, and resisting arrest. And because this is an ongoing investigation and we're hoping that other stolen property could be recovered with future search warrants, we're not releasing a lot of information with regard to that case. But I'm happy to respond to any questions that the council may have with regard to this topic. Just so we can come back for statistics to show you where we're at as compared to this point last year. We have up to this point and through the end of March in 2011, we have had 10 more residential burglaries than we did in 2011. So although the numbers don't sound huge, to us they're an indicator that we need to be more vigilant and be out there trying to prevent those crimes and to apprehend those who commit them. So I'm available for any questions.
Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since the Lompoc record is here, would you just repeat the decrease in sexual assaults one more time?
87%.
87% down. Okay, I see him writing diligently now.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chief.
As also through February, if you want good numbers, aggravated assault is down 66%. So.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay.
I'm going to make an assumption that this has happened, but when they break into cars, do the stealing electronics, I'm assuming a lot of that stuff then is pawned at a place?
Some of it is pawned, some of it is traded for drugs, some of it's traded for other things. Yeah.
So are your officers, is it a common practice then to notify pawn shops of looking for a certain property?
Well, pawn shops are legally required to provide us with pawn slips of any property they bring in.
Okay. And how about like yard sales and swap meets and that?
Yard sale people are not required to give us pawn slips.
But if someone were to let's say I had a VCR that was stolen, I see it at a garage sale. Would I say something to the owner? Would I contact you?
No, the best thing you should do is call the police and we can investigate that. And if you see a piece of property that you believe was yours that was stolen, the best thing to do is contact the department. The department, an officer will approach that individual and identify the property. And that happens. Occasionally we'll have somebody riding a stolen bicycle or something like that. The best thing is if your equipment is or your property is serialized. So if you have either etched your driver's license number or some other identifying mark on your property, that makes it very easy for us. Or if it's serialized and you have the number, that also makes it very easy for us. What sometimes comes into dispute is when somebody has not reported something stolen, they don't call the police, and then they see it later, and now they claim that this person stole it, and there's no record of it being stolen ever. And so now we've got to sort that out. That happens occasionally.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, Councilmember Starbuck.
Have we caught anybody with the cameras yet?
Not burglars, but, yeah.
I'm looking forward to the first $1,000 littering fine ticket you write with the camera.
Probably the most likely, we have had some success with graffiti, with thwarting graffiti with the cameras, and we do have some, at the intersections, they've been very helpful with some of our traffic collisions.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it. The next one is a discussion I had with the city administrator earlier today before she went home sick with regard to the council meeting of April 24th. Our city attorney and assistant city attorney, neither of which are available for that date, and both Councilmember Lingle and I will be in Washington for the NCPA effort. And it was noted that our council meeting 1 week later on June 1st has a very light agenda. And so the recommendation to the council is that we move the items from April 24th, which are to do with zoning, to June 1st. The notices
Mr. Mayor, that'd be May 1st.
Or May 1st, I'm sorry. And the notices have not been posted yet, so that's a doable thing. Any thoughts from anyone? Everybody good with that? Or yeah, Councilmember Martner? Is that good for you?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we got that one. All right, now we'll move to our agenda. And Lucille.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Councils. This evening, the Council is going to conduct a public hearing to consider initial professional analysis of the materials presented by Mayor Lynn regarding the commercial chapters of the zoning ordinance. We are looking at some basic discussion that we'd like to have with the council. We have provided some questions, and we're asking some general policy direction from the council so that we can proceed with the vision that the council has. When the original material was discussed at the council meeting, the material that was presented by the mayor was adjusted, and we did attach it to the staff report with highlights and crossouts so that we could understand where the uses and that type of thing were to be placed. We have attached to the staff report as well 2 maps for the council's review. One map which shows the existing commercial as the 6 zones that are there. And then we show one map which shows a proposed 2 zones. And it's just to give you a general concept of what the commercial looks like in the community at this time. We have noted as well on a table the intention to coordinate and to simplify the number of zones, and we've identified that in 2 areas. We've also, in an attempt to do a pros and cons, identified merging the zones, and certainly that is something that would be a positive step to simplify regulation and to make it easier for people, hopefully, to understand what the regulations are in their specific area. There were a couple of concerns that we identified as kind of went through the language, and it is simply a matter of, I think the regulations can be written in a positive manner, but we would just like a little bit more clarification from the council, if that's possible, please. At this time, we are looking at, Industrial and manufacturing uses are not permitted in the commercial zone. And I think a lot of that, when we look at some of these language uses, it is a matter of definitions. And if we are understanding the council properly, then I think it can be handled by working with the Planning Commission just to provide good definitions. As we all know, our zoning ordinance is very old, and it does need that work and clarification. So with the information that we've provided here, we would like to just ask a few questions and make sure that we're on the proper page, and when we move forward with the Planning Commission, we are taking them the direction that the council wants. We have included a section about future actions. Just to reiterate, once the Planning Commission holds the Planning Commission hearings and we do come back with an ordinance to the council, we will still have work to do on the general plan. The general plan is written so that it is consistent with the way that the zoning ordinance is set up. So we will be bringing back information and a plan timeline and a potential cost for updating the general plan as we move further through the process. The questions that we have are listed in the staff report, and I may just leave that to the council during your discussion if you wouldn't mind highlighting those and just providing us with the direction. And I'm available for any questions.
Hey, let me start out with one thing. So there's been some question if the goal in doing this was to do some work with the downtown specific plan. And frankly, that was never my intent, but it kind of got tied up in something else, and I had a long conversation with Lucille today about that. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we were kind of talking about that's something for next year, basically, would be to look at the downtown specific plan and see if there were some things that the Planning Commission needed to look at there. But the other thing is there's an interlock between the downtown specific plan and the downtown, Old Town Commercial District, OTC. And you can't have one without the other. So in the staff reports, it recommends leaving the OTC district intact, and I'm fine with that because the goal wasn't to open up the issues with the downtown specific plan. But I do want to discuss when we get to that what our vision of that zoning district would be, and my goal would be to have it as similar as possible to the general commercial success zone. And to Lucille's point, we got started on this discussion of assembly use, and we really don't have that well defined. And then we kind of started talking about the fact that our definitions were circa 1976, and they're not very well defined. And Lucille's recommendation for that was that the staff work on some definitions and take them to the Planning Commission, which I think is a good recommendation I would support, and to bring our definitions into line with the rest of what we're doing. And then the other recommendation, if you'll recall, on the original document I presented, there was a discussion of residential densities within the commercial zones. And that went in two directions. Number one, density for apartment construction, basically on the upper floor along H and Ocean, and on the lower floor off H and Ocean. And the staff's recommendation on that is that that particular subject be combined with the rest of our residential discussion. And even though it would be part of this ordinance, we would talk about all the residential things in one lump. And that seems to be a good decision to me. So those are the starting points I have. There are two things on the map. One, would be a small correction on the Grefco property, which is now the Zodovich property. There's a section along Ocean Avenue that would be part of this. It was just omitted because it was in the Planning Commission process when this map was made, and it's already in the PCD. It's PCD currently. So that would be it's this little snippet right here. And then I think there was a misunderstanding with regard to the community convenience parcels that are on the east end of Ocean in the draft commercial zoning districts, and those retained that community commercial, and my intent there was that they would be part of the commercial success district to allow for uses that are not currently allowed there. And the whole idea behind the neighborhood commercial was for the satellite shopping centers, which you see all over the map now. And so those are my thoughts. I think I'd like to, if the council would humor me, I'd like to talk about a couple of these issues individually and see if we can nail them down. Was it anyone's intent to take on the downtown specific plan at this time? Councilmember Martner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the specific plan is tied to this Old Town commercial zoning designation. And given the comments and given the, I would say, the discussion that went along 2 weeks ago regarding this, there was a mood, I would say, to just get rid of the Old Town commercial zoning because there was a perception that is keeping those stores empty. I personally don't believe that that's the case, but that was what I heard out of the discussion. And I would like to have the staff to explain to me, is there any specific zoning designation that we have in Old Town today that is restricting? I mean, I do know that there is certain things. You cannot have a realtor office, and we did hear from the realtors community that they would like to have their office there. Can you give me in 5 minutes what are the most prominent restrictions in the Old Town zoning, and how is that, and why are they there? Okay, because there is always a reason why things are where they are.
Mr. Mayor, before we get any further on specifically talking about the downtown, I think I need to remind Councilmember Starbuck that, or Vice Mayor Starbuck, that he needs to abstain from participating in specific direct discussion while on the dais. You can recuse yourself from up here. You can go down and be a member of the public and speak from the dais, but then as the council has this discussion of what they want to do at the downtown, you'll need to excuse yourself.
Send a flare up when I got to leave.
So even in this questioning process, he needs to, okay, so maybe we'll leave it for later, because I would hate to see Councilmember Starbuck going in and out, so maybe we need to get the meeting that will, at one point in time, will address a specific that issue, so then Councilmember Starbuck recuses himself. And I'm willing to wait until later to talk about this.
I'd just soon take this on first and get it done, because I think it's probably the one where we have more questions. So, Dirk, bye.
I still had my light on first. I had questions for.
Okay, go ahead. You can have first lick.
Just real quick.
Sure.
On the staff report, when we go off on tangents at the end of this, the direction that you're looking for are the 4 items under conclusion.
That's correct.
Nothing else. Just the rest of it will be decisions made on the rest then.
That is the direction that we would like to receive from the council this evening.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, so the first question I would still like to get an answer from everyone, was it anyone's intent at this point to do, for the council to do any review of the downtown specific plan? Did anyone have an intent that we were going to do that? Councilman Martner.
Well, I think the downtown specific plan has to be discussed in the context that the staff is looking for a recommendation regarding the zoning designation, and they're tied together. So I think we're going to have to talk about it whether we like it or not.
Okay. Councilmember Costa.
Marilyn, I agree that it's not a review of the plan itself. I think that that actually was planned based on the budget to be done in the next year. But I agree that we're going to have to figure out if we would like to even maintain the plan as a possibility. And if so, as you mentioned, that would probably require us keeping the Old Town commercial zoning designation, correct?
Yes, that is my understanding, and I would like Lucille to speak to that when you're done.
Great. I guess the one thing I think I want to confirm that I heard from you is that you were okay with the Old Town commercial zoning designation, but you would like to see it reworded in a way that it's as similar as possible to the general commercial success zone.
Correct.
That's probably where I would disagree with you a little bit. So that's what I wanted to just start out with. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Martin.
Well, I did ask a question before all this started, and I would like the staff
Sure.
to answer the question. And it leads to the specifics and the details. There is a perception out there that the zoning designation for Old Town Commercial is preventing businesses from coming into that area. So would you please be very specific on what the restrictions are so we can educate ourselves and educate the public? Thank you.
I think the general perception that is the most bothersome to people, and the one that we hear the most, is the restriction for office use on the ground floor along H and Ocean. That was something that was discussed in the development of the plan, because the intent and the vision at that time was to have a pedestrian-friendly Old Town area, and that was the crux of the area right there. The intent was, and I didn't work on this, but this is what it's always been explained to staff. The intent was people could go have coffee, eat, walk around, look in the shops. If there were windows, and that's one of the reasons why the design guidelines are very specific with having windows in the front area, and they're display windows, they're large for new construction, for new design that comes in. It was to allow that type of a use and to encourage people to take in any type of, hopefully, new business, retail, artisan shops, that type of thing. So that was really the intent. The other thing that was specifically prohibitive, which we've had issues with, is any automobile-related issue or use in the Old Town. Now, the designation does go to Chestnut, that takes in the old Beatty Ford site. So there's been quite a bit of discussion and people coming in saying that it was previously with an auto repair and an auto use. We've also, there is one auto repair that's allowed. That is the one on Walnut, directly across from the Park and Rec building. But that has been there. It was legal. It's legal non-conforming. It's been in continuous use in the Old Town. I know that there is also on Ocean, the old gas station that we've had a number of different uses in. There was a thrift store in it at one time. There have been different things. But it was very much thought, again, as looking at the plan, that since auto-related uses were allowed in the rest of the commercial zones, they were not a use that the group and the council at that time wanted to see in the Old Town. So that was something that was prohibited. Residential is allowed above the stories, and it is something we've actually got some, well, we've had some approved, but nothing has ever been built. It speaks to the issue of density, something that has been a problem in the Old Town Specific Plan, and was something that we were, as I explained to the mayor today, we were hoping to change, and I know that's something that he has identified as a problem as well. We have a change in the general plan. The 2030 general plan dramatically increases the density downtown, so that the residential uses, if someone comes in, they're actually able to construct something on those sites that would be pencil out, so the developers would be able to be more encouraged to use that type of use in that area. There's use lists in the Old Town, and they're pretty specific, they're pretty long, and each one was thought through as part of the process. The use lists are something that certainly can be changed. The Old Town Specific Plan, when that was adopted, those regulations became part of the architectural review guidelines and part of the zoning ordinance. That was how the plan was implemented. So the plan will need to be updated, and certainly as we work through the process, we will need to go in and look at the use lists that are in keeping with the council's direction, and how the vision for that Old Town is to proceed.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Breeze, in the Old Town Specific Plan booklet here, there's a list of permitted uses, and then there's also a list of prohibited uses. Have you ever come across the instance where there is an issue with something is suggested that's not on either list?
It does occur. You cannot cover every potential use on the lists. The idea there is you would have a class and a body of uses. So the staff then looks at it, and if the list or if the proposed use is something similar that we can find to be consistent with the particular use list, then we can make a finding that it is acceptable. That occurs in all of our zones.
Okay. That's what I imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it be a lot, wouldn't it be easier, like for the Old Town Specific area, to just have a list of prohibited uses instead of having a list of permitted and prohibited? Just let maybe the council, the planning commission, with your assistance, these are the things we do not want in our Old Town area, and just give, maybe just a very short list. I see, you mentioned auto parts stores. Maybe that's something that no one would like. Healthcare facilities. Okay, we don't want a hospital down there or something. But I mean, would it be a lot easier just to have a short list of prohibited items?
It certainly can be done that way. It generally is a good idea to just have a class of lists. You're looking to allow commercial uses there. Mm-hmm. So something that is relatively general can be done.
Okay. The only reason I bring that up, it seems like it would be more welcoming and more inviting if we just said, okay, these are not permitted. Anything else, come to us with your suggestions. Just a suggestion. Maybe that would help us a little bit in this area.
Okay, so let's close back up here and talk about individual issues and try to give Lucille some guidance. The first one, just in the evolution of downtowns, what tends to happen is they hit bottom, there's a high vacancy rate and a low rental amount. And then the users of large square footage come in because they can get inexpensive square footage, and typically that's furniture stores and thrift stores, which is the state where kind of the point in the parade we're at now. The next step tends to be offices coming in, again, picking up that low rent and increasing the density. So, for instance, a 3,000 square foot furniture store might employ 2 people, and an office use in that same space would employ 15 to 20 people. So you get more population in the area, which then helps restaurants and things like that. And then as you get some evolution and you get more population density, or you're able to add residential, then the rents start to go up, and that brings the retail stores back, and the offices move somewhere else where the rent's cheaper. So the advantage of allowing the offices in on the ground floor as an interim is that it tends to get more people working in downtown and moves the rents up and gives the other businesses opportunities. And so from that standpoint, I'm certainly in favor of changing that requirement so that businesses can operate on the ground floor. Councilmember Martner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understand what you're talking about, but it's really, you're just talking a sequence of events, a model, a business model that says, the way to bump up the rents here is to occupy with an office and so forth. But there is another aspect of development, and that is to have a vision. And my understanding is that the Old Town had a vision which was, in a way, you may want to call it historic. There is only one place in this town that is unique, and it is Old Town, whether we like it or not. It is. South H Street with the buildings, the Veterans Building being at the end, those buildings, they are very unique to this town. So I can see that there is a parallel path, which is a vision path that says we're going to preserve this part of town because it's the only unique thing that we have. Now, that is a more expensive path, may I say, okay, because it requires investment. It requires a large investment from not necessarily just city tax dollars, but it requires private investors to come in to preserve this historical area. Once the area becomes preserved and it becomes appealing, there will be people going into downtown. So we are here in a very two different paths that we're discussing. One is the very pragmatic, this is the business model, fill up those storefronts with whatever we can so we can bump up the rents. And the other one is, let's designate this a historic or a very specific area in downtown that will need to be preserved, and let's go after monies that will do that. Like lots of towns do it. I mean, we all go to other towns, and we always find that old town center, historical area that has, this is our historic part of town. So I think that's kind of what we need to talk about. It's really, do we go one path or do we go the other path? There will be arguments pro and con for both.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I agree with what Councilmember Lingle stated earlier that, by discluding the list of what's prohibited, of what's allowed, and only focusing on a list of what's prohibited, that means everything else that wasn't on the list that was included as allowed will now be allowed and should have been, they just happen not to be on that list. So I think that that's actually a great strategy. But I think we need to focus on not just prohibiting certain things, but also adding incentives specific to the Old Town commercial zone. So we're focusing on, honing in on what businesses we want there, and then helping facilitate the creation of those businesses in some way. So I think that if we look at it that way, keeping the Old Town commercial zone distinct from the commercial success zone, or general commercial success zone, for me would actually be not short-sighted, but actually be the long-term fulfillment of the vision, as Councilmember Martner stated. So that's where I'm at this point. I would like to hear from the public, though. Thank you.
Okay. So let's take a run at the public. Come on down if you want to talk about Old Town.
Terry Hammonds, Lompoc. Good evening, Council. Well, I came here in 1967, and there was a town, a center on H and Ocean. And over the 40 years that I've lived here, it's gone away. And I think the city has lost sight of what that really means to a city, or what what it could do for this city. Now, office space, I don't know. If you want to fill it up with workers and they go home at night, they turn off the lights, well, then there's no reason to build a theater or revitalize a theater. Because really, what's to hang around in the old town area? And there may be no incentive to even revitalize the theater. There may be no reason to revitalize anything other than just to have office space and people come to work, they go away, and that's it. We have that kind of like on Highway 1 going south. They turn off the lights in the house and they go south. They come back in the evening, turn on their lights, and they're gone. I mean, we don't have a vibrant downtown. These people need to have an attraction there. And I think it's incumbent upon this council to recognize that if it goes away, really downtown is Central and H. That is the downtown then. And you can see how much more activity there is in that area than there is on H and Ocean. There was many ideas that were put about in the Economic Development Committee about how to invigorate this area. I think, to me, you really have to concentrate on what you want this area to become and be revitalized. If not, forget it, and maybe it'll become office space, and that'll be all it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Alice Milligan, Lompoc. I'm not certain if the council is considering throwing out the specific plan, but I think that would not be a good thing. The city invested quite a bit of funds in terms of developing that plan, and true, it needs to be updated, but I think to throw it away would not be a good idea and a good expenditure of money. The grants that we wrote for downtown were around a pedestrian-friendly environment, and I think we need to look at that and make certain that we do have that in terms of bringing people into downtown, get out of their cars and walk, and hopefully attract some businesses that people will want to visit and spend time downtown. I mentioned last time that at the last meeting about Ocean Avenue and how wide and broad it is, and I know when you drive into Lompoc on Ocean Avenue, it just seems like it's huge, and there's no ambience to it. And I think, again, I'll mention that if Caltrans would allow the planting of trees in the medium, I think it would bring the street closer and people would feel more connected. So please keep downtown unique. I think we need to make certain that it's different than other parts of the city, and it will happen. I think right now we have some people, some businesses downtown that are not in a position to invest in their businesses, and hopefully we could, I know there is a facade improvement program, and if there's some way that we could get these people to take advantage of that and enhance the outside of their building, I think it would be great for downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. And just for the record, the facade improvement program was part of the RDA, and we've unfortunately lost that at this time.
Hello, I'm Debbie McComb. As a committee member for the Economic Development Committee, my driving force and my vision, and everyone has their dream part of it. I have been here since I was probably 8 months old, so I'm not a native, but almost. And I remember as a child going to the theater. It was a great highlight. Waiting out front for your mom to pick you up. I remember going and seeing Johnny Paycheck in the theater. So back in the day, we actually had some really good entertainment there. I agree with Terry when he mentioned that if we, and I'm pro-business, and I think people should, I am a business owner, and I think people should have the right to make application to go in where they want to. I believe that based on the layout of the old town in the specific plan, there is room for people to be able to take their businesses. I think what maybe needs to happen is a defined area within that layout of the old town that says in the core, in the center, whatever that definition is, and that's what our group is trying to define. What is the core and definition? Maybe they're allowed upstairs, similar to what you see in Santa Barbara. You see downtown, you see a lot of businesses upstairs. Maybe on the outskirts of that area, still maybe Old Town, if they want to be part of that, there's a defined area where they can fit so that you get the blending of both, so that you get that economic growth and you get the desire to bring in rents, but we still keep our focal point. If you want to invite people to come to our community and we want to become a tourist attraction and we want people to stay here and stay in our hotels, I envision things that you have maybe in downtown San Luis, downtown AG. As Councilmember Martiner said, they need to stay open later. We need to be friendly. The businesses have to find a way to stay open so that the people will come out at night. As a kid, we've always known at 5 o'clock the town shuts down. By 9 or 10 o'clock you can just about go down Ocean Avenue and there's not a car in sight. We have to change that, and by bringing in businesses that shut the lights off at 5 or 6 o'clock at night is not going to promote that. So I think we need to listen to the business owners, and I think we need to find a spot for them if they want to be within the old town. But let's find a nucleus that we save to try to build our dream with.
Thank you. Next.
My name is Robert Schmidtke. I live on Cypress Avenue here in Lompoc. I don't have a long history of residence in this community. I've been here about 6 years now. My wife, who was raised here, tells me that she used to go to the theater all the time there. Let me see. H-I-J. I guess her mother owned what is now a bar down on I or J, and the whole family lived behind it in a little place there. They were poor. She was raised here. At a restaurant. Hard-working family. What I see is somebody who's a businessman and is old buildings that are made out of unreinforced brick with facades that are ready to fall on your head. I don't say that it's not a charming area, like the area between Ocean and Cypress. That's a perfect area on H Street for a walk area for pedestrians. It's just a whole area, maybe even a block east and west of that. The minute you go north of that, now you're into traffic running in and out of town and through town. This is a main thoroughfare. Ocean, H, and Central, main thoroughfares. While you're planning all of this, I've seen this in the beach cities where they completely redevelop stuff. The old buildings, some of them stayed, but they had to be totally reinforced to stay. And so they just tore them down and made them look like old buildings. They did a lot of that, and you couldn't really tell the difference. They would let you open up pretty much any business. They just simply zoned them commercial, and with a few exceptions. I mean, you're not going to open up 18 tattoo parlors and 50 bars in a row, although that's happened in Hermosa Beach. But they've got a lot of people walking around there in a 2-block area. There's business all night. But it's bar business. It's very little retail, maybe a few little stores that sell something. Around the corner on the Strand is somebody renting out surf mats during the day. They have large gatherings of people for volleyball matches and things like that. If you want to see a place that really sticks to the old stuff, to the old buildings, that wants to see these, you'll have to go to the Middle East. They haven't marched much from the 5th century there. And that's how those towns are designed. Yeah, they pretty much stay the same, the ones that they haven't had accidents in, shall we say. But I think Lompoc has a lot more to offer. I've seen some of these wine tasting rooms opening up there, little restaurants. We have several new restaurants. We could, that could grow into a restaurant area. It could grow into I mean, there's some great food in the Central Coast. I know. I've availed myself of it. However, we've got to open it up so just about anything can open up there, and some things need a conditional use permit. And you can't get stuck on, well, look at that neat old building. I mean, look at that neat old building that's been there for 100 years that's ready to fall down, and nobody wants to invest in repairing it. Most commercial areas, that we have a bank, the old Bank of America. It is not open at night, but it's a very old building. The theater, lovely place, and they were fixing that until the people that were running this whole deal ripped it off and left town. I don't know who they are. It can be done, but you got to think ahead. You can't be glued to the past just because it's a brick and mortar building. You can recreate it. You can tear it down and recreate it, make it safer, and make it more available to more businesses, is what I'm saying. It's cheaper, and it works just as good. Heck, it works better. You might consider that. There's more to this area here. Way out on the west end of town, there's this whole empty area here that's farmland that ought to be commercial or residential or industrial. I don't know why that sticks out there. I've been looking at that when I was buying property. That should be anything but farmland. But if you want to grow rutabagas out there, you should be able to. But it shouldn't be limited to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Bob, you started down and then you sat down. Yeah, you, Bob Manning. Okay. Last chance. Going? Gone? Okay, back to council. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. I think that a good point was brought up by a member of the public, and that's possibly that a good compromise here would be to limit the Old Town commercial area as it stands now. So that way on the outskirt areas, you could have ground floor office use, or possibly some kind of auto use, or all the uses that you can't use that we would then be allowing in the general commercial success, and just limit those to the downtown core of maybe even only like a 2-block radius. I see that as possibly a good compromise. I also am wondering if the Old Town commercial zoning ordinance should be reviewed by the Planning Commission in this process and brought back to the City Council for review. I think that would be helpful as well in updating the ordinance to be similar to the commercial success, but still have some distinction to it. That's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think we need to give them a little more guidance than that, because it's going to be very difficult for them to come back with something if we haven't really decided what we want them to come back with. So I'd still like to get a couple issues resolved. I think your suggestion of looking at it perhaps with core and a little less core is a good one. Just to talk about the 100 block of North I Street, there are currently 2 vacant buildings there. One next to American Host that belongs to Dennis that he's been unable to rent because it's a very small space and it was really built as an office, and a number of stores have gone through it, but it was always an office. And so that's the kind of issue that you have. The other one is on the other side of the street in the building where Baroda Farms is, and the back of that, which doesn't even face the street. I think the most recent use was the Moose Lodge, and then a painter at Vandenberg rented it for a couple months while they were working on Vandenberg. But that's another example of something that would be a good office use, but you can't put an office in there. So those are the kinds of things that are difficult, and I think we need to craft some ideas to give to the Planning Commission with regard to this. Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also want to thank Councilmember Costa for picking that up as well. The community members' definition of possibly closing in a little bit on the Old Town area. And then the other thing I think we need to sort of focus on is who are we trying to attract to our downtown area? We don't, at 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock, I'm having my jammies on and I'm watching Jeopardy, so I'm not going to be, but, or is it Wheel of Fortune then? I don't know. But there are some people that go to the downtown area still every single evening. Divine Wine, thank goodness, she's done a wonderful job there of attracting people. You go there in the evening, and there's some young professionals, business people. I think there's a lot of military that go there. So are we trying to attract, well, I think we should be trying to attract some of the military personnel. I believe their nightlife is heading all into Santa Maria. What are we going to do with our downtown area? Mr. Schuyler's out there, and I was having dinner with one of his colleagues the other day, Mr. Humdahl, and he was telling me about the time when the downtown area was very vibrant. I don't know if I want to say what was down there, 3 or 4 of the different type of organizations that brought a lot of the military people, the topless bars, not that we're going to bring those. But he says every single night, the place was hopping until we shut those down. But we need to find something that's going to be attracting the young professionals, I believe the military. We need to try to keep some of our military personnel right in our downtown area. And that's why if we look at the list of things on this thing that just put what is excluded instead of what can be approved, I think we're going to see our downtown area possibly grow a little bit. But maybe define who we're trying to focus on down there.
Councilmember Martner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree that we need to find a core area of Old Town, town center, whatever you want to call it, and have the vision that it's going to be a pedestrian-driven area for people to stroll around, go in and out of shops, have coffee, entertain themselves, eat, shop, whatever. And then ease up the restrictions in the other areas so we can stimulate some businesses into that whole area. Now, as to the details, whether it's the store that the mayor is referring to in North I, or whether it's Councilmember Starbucks building, just to throw something out, I really think that the planning, that is where the Planning Commission plays its role. That's where the Planning Commission exists, is to look at the particular details. So I will go back again with my very basic stance here is we can provide general guidelines, but I think that the Planning Commission, along with the staff, public hearings, need to basically do something with this map. And that's where I would like to say that the direction that we should give is one of maintain a core downtown that is going to be protected, and then ease restrictions in other areas, and to a specific what street and what building. I really think the Planning Commission is the one that is most qualified to look at the pros and cons in each of the one examples.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. Again, I'm looking at a good compromise possibly between those two. I agree that the Planning Commission can give us more specific suggestions, but possibly Old Town Commercial 1, Old Town Commercial 2, where we're talking about the core of maybe 2 blocks is staying Old Town Commercial 1 as it stands now. And then Old Town Commercial 2 will have everything allowed in that downtown core plus more, but maybe not as much as the general commercial success zone. Does that make sense? Is that something that staff possibly thinks could work, where you have, 2 versions of Old Town Commercial depending on where in that current zoning your building is located? Again, trying to sort of allow more uses in these areas, almost to a staggered effect in that way.
It can certainly be written that way. I'd just like to note that the restriction on office use on the ground floor is only on H and Ocean. It is not on the balance of the community. So that was something that was addressed when the plan came forward?
So that would be my suggestion to the Planning Commission, to look at that as a viable option, especially on the 200 block of North H, and the very far sides of West Ocean and East Ocean. So you're really looking at just a couple block radius there that would stay the Old Town Commercial 1 as it sits now, along with some of the updates that we're talking about as well, reviewing the ordinance as it sits now, and then going back to look at that general plan as well. Or the specific plan as well in the future. So I don't know if that's an idea that we could send off to them. That was just something that looked like it could be a compromise.
I think that covers a lot of it. The one issue I think we need to talk about would be the 200 block of North H, and the principal issue there is the various parcels of the Beatty Ford property. And the fact that no automotive use is allowed, which basically has made that property kind of useless. And there are the two parcels on the east side of the street, and there's also the one parcel on the west side, and then the old apartment building next door to that actually also belongs to the Beatties, and the long-term goal was to tear it down and incorporate it into the dealership location. But then it ended up being sold instead. So perhaps with regard to your thought, when we get out into that 200 block, that would be where an automotive use could be allowed to give us some use of that parcel.
Okay, I don't want to get into another subject before we bring Councilmember Starbuck back, but you're using auto use as an example, right? So that would also possibly include any other example we've been talking about, like light manufacturing, or like I'm talking about microbreweries kind of stuff, or.
No, I think the automotive is kind of a separate area of discussion because in the code it's viewed differently, and I think there's two ways to approach it. Number one would be to say that a facility that had been built for an automotive purpose could be remodeled or reused and continue in an automotive purpose, and that would account for the Ford location, the location across the street, the gas station at I and Ocean, and the pre-existing non-conforming use at Walnut and I that's been continuously used for an automotive facility. And additionally, across from that, on the other side of I and Walnut, that building was originally built as an auto service facility and has evolved into other things.
Right, so I think that's, Marilyn, I think that's going to take us back to a more theoretical question, and that's if we want to help facilitate bringing back an automotive use in what is in possibly the Old Town Commercial 2 zone, as I suggested it. So I think that's something for council's discussion. When you're talking about bringing young folks back, again, that's something, the lights stay on, but nobody's there past a certain time in the evening. So that's something I think that we need to discuss if we're looking at, economic viability. If that's the only thing economically viable to go in a location like that, that's one thing. But I just want council to discuss that if possible. Thank you.
Councilmember Martner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know why we would want to have an automobile retail place next to the Lompoc Theater. I mean, what do you do after you get out of the movies? You go and buy a car? I mean, again, it talks about the vision. What is it that we want Old Town to be? Why are we talking specifically about that location? I don't really know. I guess because it's vacant, and is there really any specific restriction that cannot be turned into something else? I don't really understand. I mean, if there is economic vitality, that whole building could be turned into something else besides an automobile use. So again, are we just trying to help that owner to do something with that, or are we looking at the community and say the community is looking for a downtown with activities? So I'm a little confused that we are just going specifically about that.
Well, I guess what I would say is the building's now been vacant for nearly 20 years. It shows no signs of going in any direction because it has no current use. Some automotive facilities have looked at it and thought about it, but even for an auto repair facility, it couldn't be utilized. So it basically is going to sit there empty until it's either bulldozed and a new project goes up, which isn't looking too hopeful in the near term, given the current economy. And frankly, it's kind of hideous. But the building owner hasn't had an income stream out of it for many years, and so there's a difficulty with doing anything with it. And if we can find a way to give them an opportunity to put something in there, in my mind, a business that's in there and doing some business and generating sales tax and cleaning up the property and going forward is way better than a vacant building for another 20 years. Remember that the point that I tried to make a long time ago was that this zoning ordinance was passed in 1986, and the downtown specific plan was passed in 2002 approximately. In that time, we've torn down 3 buildings, built 1, and conducted 2 facelifts. So what we're doing now isn't working. And I appreciate the fact that we want to maintain our unique downtown, but we need to give it an opportunity to do something in the meantime. If it weren't for the critical mass we achieved in thrift stores, we would have a tremendous number of vacant buildings. Fortunately, we acquired 10 thrift stores, which have now started to bring people from out of town here to shop, and that's a positive impact. But without those, we would have another, 25,000 square feet of vacant space. So that's the point. Thank you, Councilmember Costa.
I think Councilmember Lingle.
Councilmember Lingle, didn't see you through the water pot.
That's okay. I'll move it.
Thank you.
It's not the time to discuss this option right now. We will have it before us in a couple of months, I guess. But since we're talking about the old Beatty Ford facility, one use for that, and I'm going to bring it up again, I brought it up before, it was we keep talking about our transit center. That, in my opinion, would be a great location for a transit center. And then along the Ocean Avenue, not just transit center, but to have little retail shops as well, a sandwich shop, a coffee shop, a newsstand. So it'd be commercial and our transit center. Again, bring people into the downtown area in the evening as the commuters come back into town, give them something to do. But that is, I believe, a possibility for that location if we want to consider that in a couple of months when we bring it up.
Thank you. Councilmember Costa?
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. I know that just kind of caught me by surprise because when we're talking about locations, I don't even think that location was discussed in the staff report. So I'm going to say that that's a great idea, but I don't even know if we'll consider it in the future. I was curious. I heard some murmurs in the audience, so I'd be interested to know if there was anybody else who had any additional public comment on what we've been talking about here.
Come on down.
Hi, Debbie McComb again with the Economic Development Committee. It's mainly just a suggestion. Where you were talking about bringing this to the Planning Commission for its review, I would like to suggest that maybe you direct a joint workshop between the Economic Development Committee and the Planning Commission and see if we could put our heads together and come up with mutual ideas, since we're trying to work really hard for the vision and the economic growth, and they're trying to keep the same goal in mind, that together we may come up with some new ideas.
Nicholas Gonzalez, resident and a member of the Planning Commission. On that same line, I think what's really imperative is we talk about a lot of conceptual ideas, and they sound great, but I think sooner or later, and I have stated this in maybe some chamber meetings and when they had some initial Old Town, Downtown workshops at the chamber, was that we have to look practicality at what we have in the downtown. And basically what you have is you have really large spaces or really small spaces. So when you're talking retail, you have to ask yourself, how many widgets can you sell to generate a significant profit to pay the overhead of a large space, and vice versa. There's critical points where a building may be too small for retail to generate enough sales to provide for the overhead and for reasonable profit for a small entrepreneur. And so I think, from my background is finance, so when we come in and we look on whether or not we're going to finance a building, whether it be a renovation or remodel or construction or just a cash out to do renovations, you start to look at rents. So rents are what really drive a lot of what's going to happen. If you don't have the rents, you don't have the income, you can't support the debt service, so you're never going to get renovation. So at some point we have to start looking at what, and this is where the Economic Development Committee comes into place, what are we really looking to attract down there? And somebody's sitting down and doing the real economic analysis of what are the current rents, what is it going to cost to run that business, what can be sold from that business, and is there a reasonable economic profit? And through that, you're going to slowly but certainly weed out what's feasible and what's not, and then go in that direction. And that's what's going to drive everything else. Thank you.
Next.
Arlen Seacrest. Gee, I guess I would suggest you go back to probably about 1954 and bring it up to about 1963 when things started changing downtown. And look at all those businesses were there, and a lot of them you don't want down there anymore, but automotive was prominent. On the corner of Walnut and H, you had the Chevrolet dealer. In the Lompoc Record Building, you had the Pontiac dealer. Stan's Automotive sold Pontiacs at one time, which was on where the bank's at now. Hobbs Brothers was on that corner across from the bank. That was a Dodge dealer, and they sold boats, fishing tackle. They not only sold it locally, but they sold it wholesale going up north when they went up to some length and one thing another. And then over on Ocean Avenue, you had Lynn's Cafe. You had a drugstore there. There was two of them on that corner. One where the Oddfellows building's at, that had a fountain in it. The other one was just a real nice drugstore owned by the same party, but they had a lot of nice things for the women to buy in the way of small jewelry and compacts and your makeup and that kind of stuff. Look back at that and then relook at Lompoc and think what you're trying to do. You're calling it an old town. Well, Old Town is not Santa Barbara and Lompoc. It's what it was. And it was very successful. You had two restaurants. You had on West Ocean Avenue, you had the Rice Bowl and the Lucky Spot right next door to each other. Back in those days, the Rice Bowl stayed open till 3 o'clock in the morning every night. And a lot of time as a senior in high school, I was down there until it closed, believe it or not. And the reason they stayed open is because of the bar activity in the Lynn's Cafe. They had a bar. You had Jasper's, and I forget what other ones were down there, but they were after capturing that, and they were always in there cleaning. So we need to really go back and look at that and say, hey, that really worked. And one thing they were not going to allow is real estate offices. Gee, how did everything get going in Lompoc after Vandenberg came up? Because of the real estate offices were right there in the 100 block of North and South H and the East and West Ocean. A lot of that stuff was there, and it can be brought back in small businesses. You had the Niggis's Furniture Store, and they sold carpet and what have you. They did well enough that they could give the city that land up there. On 8th Street, Balaam's office was right there where that Pocket Park is at, too. And then that, when they passed away, my parents moved over on Ocean Avenue, and then she moved back into Starbucks building now, is where she was when she passed away. But that brought a lot of people downtown to rent property because that's who handled the rentals in town. They were right down there, so you brought people downtown when they got to town. I don't see anything wrong with office buildings downtown because those people eat adjacent to their building a lot of times. So think about it that way. And that automotive thing, I don't see anything wrong with that if something went back into Beatty's. You've got the motorcycle shop there. right downtown now in the old cleaners building. He does a fantastic business, very well recognized all up and down the coast and around the place. At one time, you had Hot Rod Ranch that wanted to move in the old Volkswagen building down there on Ocean Avenue where the trailers are at now. I can just imagine what the Planning Commission would have thought of that. But that would be a tourist draw eventually for them because they're going to become that quality a shop. They are constantly winning in car shows now, and they've had a couple of car shows out at their ranch. Anyway, I've lectured long enough. Thank you.
And next, please.
Dawn Thomas. I am also on the Economic Development Committee. I wanted to reiterate, I guess, what Debbie McComb stated, that my suggestion would be to have a collaborative effort between the Planning Commission, the Economic Development Commission, and possibly some members of council in order for us to get a more focused vision. I think deciding the zoning might be putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. As part of our contradictions within the Economic Development Committee, we outlined having a decentralized, unfocused vision as being a major roadblock to success. And so I think finding focus and through collaboration, that may be the only way that we can do that, is focusing our vision and creating zoning that will allow that vision to happen. So once we get that vision in place, we'll then know how to zone it. We can market it to others. More importantly, we can market it to the private property owners there. They need the buy-in as well. That way they see what the big picture is. They want to be able to upgrade their building, allow certain businesses to rent from them, because all they have to do is say, no, I'm not going to sign that lease, and that business doesn't come in. I mean, these are private property owners, so we need to get their buy-in. We want to package it and market it and make it the hottest deal in town, get them on board. And I think if we all are on the same page with a focused vision through a joint meeting, we'll be able to have success.
Don, how many people are on your downtown subcommittee?
There are 7.
Think you could whittle yourselves down to 5 for the purpose of a joint meeting? Okay.
One more bite at the apple.
Small bites.
Small bite. What are you protecting us from? The government that governs least always governs best. You've got to stop stacking this stuff up on us, or we can't grow as a community. I want to see this community grow. I'm here. I want to see this place be a raving success. But you've got to open it up. I mean, there's rules. The power to tax is the power to destroy. You know, you got to open things up and let America work. And in the past, America worked just fine in this town. You even had people making movies here. W.C. Fields, what a guy. Can you imagine? There were 2 theaters up in the Old Town area before. My wife told me about that when she was a little girl. Her mother would shove her out the door, and they would show up at the theater with a nickel or a dime and be able to buy candy and a way in. You know, it was a very quaint little town. Now, our society is not a quaint little society anymore. But by gosh, Lompoc is a nice little town, and it can be better, but you've got to open this up. You've got to let people do business. And if you don't want a certain kind of business in there because it would be detrimental to society or the area, then put that on a conditional use permit basis, but open the area up to just about anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I think that that's a fabulous suggestion made by the committee members, and I'd be in full favor of that joint meeting. I don't necessarily believe that there needs, I think that 5 representatives would be good, but getting the majority of the community, or excuse me, the committee members there to support would be a great idea as well. So I'm open to that idea. I definitely think, with the caveat that my suggestion would be for them to consider an Old Town Commercial Zone 1 and 2, again, trying to open up more uses of these properties. When you're talking about another community member talked about mostly small and large space, I think that's a really good point because, again, I think that there can be certain light manufacturing that can go in downtown. And I keep going back to this idea of a microbrewery because I spoke to a brewer yesterday about this idea. And so there's certain things that I think go well into downtown that aren't necessarily, certain commercial uses only. So I think that looking at Old Town Commercial 1 and 2 would be able to open up a lot of these regulations and restrictions and uses. But I agree that that vision, if we can bring everybody on the same page, that's where we're really going to get the success. So I would be in favor of getting that going. Thank you.
Councilmember Martner, that good for you?
Absolutely. I think it's a great idea because, as you said, if we fight each other over, what should go here and there, we're never going to get anywhere. I mean, we really need to focus down, this is what we want to be, and then go and market the hell out of it. It's really what it's all about. Thank you.
Councilmember Lingle?
I agree, it's a good idea. And I think what I have received out of this is that we don't want to completely scrap our own town area, specific plan. We want to do something with it to protect whatever we have there, but we definitely want to leave it somewhat open. I mean, we don't want to restrict it that nothing can go down there. But I'm going back to the comment that I made earlier, is just give a short list of things you don't want there and open it up, but don't scrap the Old Town specific plan doing it.
Okay. Lucille, got that all?
Yes, thank you.
All right. I'd like to take a minute and address the map and the one change I'd like to see on the map so we can get that done and go forward.
Mr. Mayor, are we done with downtown or are we still on downtown?
No, we're going to talk about downtown for about 4 hours so Starbucks can stay out. I'm sorry you wouldn't be able to go there. That's in downtown. Okay, so I'd like to come back to the map, and the one change I'd recommend in the map is that those neighborhood commercial parcels that are located on East Ocean would instead be general commercial success zone parcels, to give them the opportunity to be all that they can be. And those are if you look at the map titled Draft Commercial Zoning Districts, it would be the yellow parcels on East Ocean. And that was a little misunderstanding between myself and the staff when we were talking about this.
Is this on the draft or the existing? This one, right?
Yeah, this one right here, the one that only has yellow and blue, would be the parcels.
On West Ocean.
I'm sorry, West Ocean,
Okay,
yes.
never mind. Yeah.
West Ocean, yes. So, Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. Staff, can you speak to that? Why staff had that listed as neighborhood commercial success instead of general commercial success zone?
It's a convenience center zone, and that is how we left it on that side. There are less intense uses than the general commercial, so we thought it does fit with the neighborhood commercial. We did suggest that it was possible that some of that neighborhood commercial be expanded, and it would be something that the Planning Commission could look at the use list that were a little bit less intense. The general commercial, everything that's kind of north of Chestnut is a more intense use. And all we did was point out to the council if you would look at those areas along Ocean both ways, if you wanted it to have the same type of use or if you wanted it to have a less intense use. So it was just what the vision of the council is.
Can you explain to me what you mean by intense use?
More shopping centers, more larger stores. When you look at the area along Ocean, those are smaller strips or stores. They're smaller, 2 or 3 businesses in a small more of a strip center, what we'd consider just individual buildings, where you've got the larger buildings up and the larger groupings along Central and H.
I think that I had a concern that, do we really want a large shopping center in that area? But then I go back and I look at the parcel sizes, and I see that the parcel sizes really wouldn't allow for that to be economically viable anyway, except for down maybe 1 or 2 blocks past that, where I might actually be okay with larger development, because as we're talking about bringing more development to the south side of town, that would almost help facilitate that downtown development as well. So my one question for you is, for staff, because of the parcel size, would you agree with that train of thought that I just presented? Or do you think that there's still the concern that you could have an intense use even with the small parcel sizes?
We just wanted to bring it up for a discussion item, because you could ultimately, in the future, combine parcels and create a larger parcel.
That would require somebody to purchase the entire lot of property and then demolish and rebuild everything.
That's true, but it is a potential.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess my question regarding that specific one is there, beyond Ocean, is the rest of it is all residential, correct? So I guess the question is shouldn't the neighborhood be somewhat involved in the process if we're going to change this into a general commercial zone as opposed to a neighborhood commercial zone? As you say, the general commercial success may bring higher circulation, more traffic, trucks, this and that, and as such, what happens to the neighborhood aspect of that area? I don't know. I don't know whether the neighborhood cares or it doesn't care. The point is that it is a residential area in its majority. And we talk about governing and imposing. And now here we're going to make a big change, and we're going to call that a general commercial success zone. And I'd just like to hear from the neighbors. What do they think about it?
Councilmember Starbuck.
That parcel right there is on probably the second busiest street in town that has little convenience stores that have traffic in and out of it. All we're doing is upzoning the property for the current owners on it and allow more use. It'll probably still maintain the current business that's there in the neighborhood commercial success. Just for the upgrade. The ability to go ahead and put something commercial in there other than a 7-Eleven or a drug rehab or a whatever else on that strip.
So several examples might be that Mr. Nolan, who owns the property at the corner of K and Ocean, came and testified before the council that he would like to improve the used car dealership and or put in a small neighborhood garage to service the surrounding area. But under the neighborhood community convenience zone as it exists today, those uses wouldn't be possible. And if you look at the community convenience zone as it exists today, the number of uses is fairly short. There have been buildings vacant for a considerable period of time on some of those parcels. Most of them, thankfully, are occupied today. And I think the important point is kind of what Councilmember Costa said, is that the buildings are built. I doubt in our lifetimes, looking out at the youngest person in the audience, that we're going to see those buildings torn down and some more intense use put in. What we are instead going to do is allow for more diversity of use in terms of the types of businesses that can go into the building. And remember what I talked about way back, which was that when a business comes to town, they will look for the building that is the most optimum for their business to occupy. And if the zoning doesn't allow that, then they will go to a less optimum building, which diminishes their chance of success, number one, and in some cases, or actually in many cases, they simply won't come here. So what this does is give them more options. And again, like most of the areas that we're talking about, they're already built. So the chances for something really offensive to go in are rather slim. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. Ms. Breeze, can you answer a question for me? When this goes to the Planning Commission, will the owners of these properties be notified that this will be discussed at that meeting?
When we have a requirement or an area that is this large, we are required to put it in the paper or do our regular noticing on the website. We're not required to do individual noticing. However, we have always had the practice of doing a notice, and the intention was that when we went to the Planning Commission and when it comes back to the council for a decision, then we would notice the individual property owners.
Okay, I think that as far as input at the Planning Commission level, which actually sometimes can be more helpful than once it gets here and we have a full set of recommendations, I'd be curious to know if, because we're looking at this neighborhood commercial success, or what was originally convenience center, to change from a neighborhood convenience center to a general commercial success area, if we could notice that area of residences that could possibly be affected by that in this case?
The residential uses as well, or the residential properties as well, surrounding those? Is that what
is the practice of that? Is it just the property owners?
We would do the property owners. I can't tell you how many parcels there are, but that's a significant number of individual mailings that would be.
I guess when I'm thinking about, what do I think of H and Ocean, I never really thought of Ocean, any part of it really, as sort of a neighborhood convenience. It was always sort of our main commercial corridors. So that's sort of why I buy into the idea that this could be zone commercial, general commercial success as well. So my concern would be also the effect on the residences. I think that's a good point. So I'm curious if we can come up with a way of getting those folks engaged if they're interested while this goes through the Planning Commission to be discussed. But my recommendation would be that be changed to general commercial success. Thank you.
Councilmember Starbuck.
One of the examples that just kind of comes out here with this is the fact that there is a very large building down there that years ago used to be a grocery store. Current use right now is a karate dojo or something in there. It's far too big to be considered neighborhood commercial, but it's zoned where you cannot put anything commercial in there. So it's in there now as a karate training center on a conditional use permit when it's a huge commercial building in a neighborhood commercial success zone, which does not allow what the commercial would do.
Okay, Bob, you haven't said a word, so weigh in and let's get this one done.
Yeah, I like karate. So, no, I agree with just making that, putting it as a general commercial success zone.
All right, that gives us 4 in favor, so we can move forward to the next issue.
Marilyn, do you feel that there's any way to address the concern brought forward by Councilmember Martner in regards to, although I agree that I don't believe any, major demolishing and rebuilding will happen as would be allowed in the general commercial success, but in the spirit of getting the folks engaged in what could possibly affect their surroundings?
Lucille, could we notify the contiguous parcels to that.
We could certainly do that.
Thank you.
Okay. That good with everybody? Bob? Yep. Okay. Thank you. Now let's talk about, for just a moment, about ordinance definitions. And the path that the staff has recommended in conversation to me would be that the staff would look at the existing ordinance definitions, zoning ordinance definitions, and they would bring that to the Planning Commission for review and approval, and then it would come to us in the big package of everything in October. And my goal date there would be that they would generate that information and have it to the Planning Commission no later than August 1st. Would that work for you, Lucille?
I think we would try and break it up and attempt to do the definitions that go with the commercial so we could identify those uses, and that way it wouldn't be such a gigantic issue.
Well, you know, however you would be able to go forward with it, that makes sense. Is everyone okay with that? Councilmember Costa? Okay. So there you have that one. Got those two. Okay, there was the next discussion. I'm still driving my way down the list. The next discussion was originally I had introduced the residential densities with the commercial zone. The staff recommended that all the residential densities be considered together, which is the next thing we're taking up. And so we would be considering the residential densities for the 3 residential zones and also the residential densities for the downtown, the commercial success zone general, and the other one, community. I'm still having trouble getting my, neighborhood commercial success. And that seems to make sense to me. Is everyone okay with that as a process? It would just that they felt that we should talk about all of the residential at one time rather than taking part of it now and part of it with the residential. So that was just their path that they recommended. Okay, everybody good with that? Okay, all right, got that one for you. And now on page 3 we have some questions under discussion. The existing commercial zoning designations were established for specific purposes identified in the zoning ordinance prior to the consolidation of 5, now 4, into a single, as we've taken Old Town out. It may be beneficial to have the Planning Commission review the purpose of the zones to assure that the new zones conform with the future land use directions the City Council would like long term. And from my standpoint, I'm happy with consolidating 4 into 1 and going forward. I think that's the easiest path forward. It's what we've been talking about along the way. I'm sorry? This is basically a question of do we in fact want to consolidate 4 into 1, I think is kind of where we're going with this. And I think we're going in the right direction of simplification and making it easier. So I think they're looking for a reaffirmation. And in here it says 5, but we've removed the Old Town from it. So this would be a reaffirmation of the concept of moving 4 zones into 1 and covering them in the way, in a general sense, that I laid it out, which was that properties on H and Ocean had one set of requirements, and properties off H and Ocean had some other options.
Marilyn, I agree that I think that council should be reaffirming that, because I think that's part of the reason why we saw so much development on that side of town. And we didn't maintain the same amount of development on the south side of town because the requirements were very different and the uses became very different. So I know that there in the conclusion it asks if the vision of the council is to allow the same intensity of use along Central Avenue and North H as along East and West Ocean. And at this point, I am going to agree that we keep it as one designation, not different designations along East and West Ocean Avenue.
Councilmember Martiner.
Yeah, I was actually looking at that point, and I would like the staff to, give me a reason why you think it should have different designations. I mean, there is staff recommendation is to consider a different designation along East and West Ocean Avenue. So I would like to hear what the reasoning is. I did read some of the pros and cons. So
it was simply to bring the discussion point so the council would make a conscious decision. You are correct that those are smaller parcels along Ocean Avenue. However, there is the potential for some of the parcels to be bundled together to create larger centers. So we just wanted to make sure that that discussion came to the forefront and the council was comfortable with that potential, not a likelihood, but a possible potential.
Thank you.
Okay, so everybody's still good with the direction we're going? Okay. With the exception of the change to the downtown in 4 versus 5.
I want to make one comment regarding Old Town and having to, I did hear at one point in time Councilmember Costa talking about 1, 2, and 3. Whether the Old Town should have the core, and that would be commercial zone 1, and then there would be a periphery commercial zone 2. Did I misunderstand that regarding the Old Town specific, that there would be 2 separate commercial zonings within Old Town?
Let me
Vice Mayor Starbuck, can you recuse yourself again? Sorry.
Can you just go stand in the corner? You can go out that exit over there. And just as a thought, it could actually be block specific within the ordinance, so we wouldn't actually have to create 2 zones. I would just like to let them work it out the best way, but I think the whole concept was stair-stepped. That was what I was voting in favor of.
Right, and that was just, from my perspective, a suggestion to give to the Planning Commission to discuss with the Economic Development Committee as a possible solution, where you'd have the downtown core as a smaller area, therefore opening up uses on the periphery of that area, whether that's zone 1, zone 2, or block specific. That was the suggestion that I was making to look into.
And that's my understanding also.
Okay, that's fine. So I think the Planning Commission should still have the liberty to come up with more than 2 zoning if that's what they wish to. Okay.
Remember that the whole goal of this was to give them a 70% plan.
Everything.
That's true, but it is a potential.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Martiner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess my question regarding that specific one is there, beyond Ocean, is the rest of it is all residential, correct? So I guess the question is shouldn't the neighborhood be somewhat involved in the process if we're going to change this into a general commercial zone as opposed to a neighborhood commercial zone? As you say, the general commercial success may bring higher circulation, more traffic, trucks, this and that, and as such, what happens to the neighborhood aspect of that area? I don't know. I don't know whether the neighborhood cares or it doesn't care. The point is that it is a residential area in its majority. And we talk about governing and imposing. And now here we're going to make a big change and we're going to call that a general commercial success zone. And I'd just like to hear from the neighbors. What do they think about it?
Councilmember Starbuck.
That parcel right there is on probably the second busiest street in town that has little convenience stores that have traffic in and out of it. All we're doing is upzoning the property for the current owners on it and allow more use. It'll probably still maintain the current business that's there in the neighborhood commercial success. Just for the upgrade. The ability to go ahead and put something commercial in there other than a 7-Eleven or a drug rehab or a whatever's else on that strip.
So several examples might be that Mr. Nolan, who owns the property at the corner of K and Ocean, came and testified before the council that he would like to improve the used car dealership and or put in a small neighborhood garage to service the surrounding area. But under the neighborhood community convenience zone as it exists today, those uses wouldn't be possible. And if you look at the community convenience zone as it exists today, the number of uses is fairly short. There have been buildings vacant for a considerable period of time on some of those parcels. Most of them, thankfully, are occupied today. And I think the important point is kind of what Councilmember Costa said, is that the buildings are built. I doubt in our lifetimes, looking out at the youngest person in the audience, that we're going to see those buildings torn down and some more intense use put in. What we are instead going to do is allow for more diversity of use in terms of the types of businesses that can go into the building. And remember what I talked about way back, which was that when a business comes to town, they will look for the building that is the most optimum for their business to occupy. And if the zoning doesn't allow that, then they will go to a less optimum building, which diminishes their chance of success, number one, and in some cases, or actually in many cases, they simply won't come here. So what this does is give them more options. And again, like most of the areas that we're talking about, they're already built. So the chances for something really offensive to go in are rather slim. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. Ms. Breeze, can you answer a question for me? When this goes to the Planning Commission, will the owners of these properties be notified that this will be discussed at that meeting?
When we have a requirement or an area that is this large, we are required to put it in the paper or do our regular noticing on the website. We're not required to do individual noticing. However, we have always had the practice of doing a notice, and the intention was that when we went to the Planning Commission and when it comes back to the council for a decision, then we would notice the individual property owners.
Okay, I think that as far as input at the Planning Commission level, which actually sometimes can be more helpful than once it gets here and we have a full set of recommendations, I'd be curious to know if, because we're looking at this neighborhood commercial success, or what was originally convenience center, to change from a neighborhood convenience center to a general commercial success area, if we could notice that area of residences that could possibly be affected by that in this case?
The residential uses as well, or the residential properties as well, surrounding those? Is that what is
the practice of that? Is it just the property owners?
We would do the property owners. I can't tell you how many parcels there are, but that's a significant number of individual mailings that would be.
I guess when I'm thinking about, what do I think of H and Ocean, I never really thought of Ocean, any part of it really, as sort of a neighborhood convenience. It was always sort of our main commercial corridors. So that's sort of why I buy into the idea that this could be zoned commercial, general commercial success as well. So my concern would be also the effect on the residences. I think that's a good point. So I'm curious if we can come up with a way of getting those folks engaged if they're interested while this goes through the Planning Commission to be discussed. But my recommendation would be that be changed to general commercial success. Thank you.
Councilmember Starbuck.
One of the examples that just kind of comes out here with this is the fact that There is a very large building down there that years ago used to be a grocery store. Current use right now is a karate dojo or something in there. It's far too big to be considered neighborhood commercial, but it's zoned where you cannot put anything commercial in there. So it's in there now as a karate training center on a conditional use permit when it's a huge commercial building in a neighborhood commercial success zone, which does not allow what the commercial would do.
Okay, Bob, you haven't said a word, so weigh in and let's get this one done.
Yeah, I like karate. So, no, I agree with just making that, or putting it as a general commercial success zone.
All right, that gives us 4 in favor, so we can move forward to the next issue.
Marilyn, do you feel that there's any way to address the concern brought forward by Councilmember Martner in regards to, although I agree that I don't believe any, major demolishing and rebuilding will happen as would be allowed in the general commercial success, but in the spirit of getting the folks engaged in what could possibly affect their surroundings?
Lucille, could we notify the contiguous parcels to that?
We could certainly do that.
Thank you.
Okay. That good with everybody? Bob? Sure. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Now let's talk about, for just a moment, about ordinance definitions. And the path that the staff has recommended in conversation to me would be that the staff would look at the existing ordinance definitions, zoning ordinance definitions, and they would bring that to the Planning Commission for review and approval. Then it would come to us in the big package of everything in October. And my goal date. Okay, we're going to start on the next one, which is the paragraph beginning with, "At this time, residential uses are not permitted in PCD and C2 and CC zones. A conditional use permit is required for residential uses in the CO zone, and residential uses are permitted in the mixed-use zone. The 2030 general plan proposed consideration of residential uses for the H Street corridor infill area. Permitting residential uses will require additional review to assure conformance with the certified housing element." And so what I would say to this is, I think if we truly want the compact urban form, if we truly want densities that cause a walking community, if we truly want businesses within that walking community, that we're going to have to allow housing densities that'll cause it to happen. And I really had never thought about this until the 2030 general plan discussion of adding those uses on the H Street corridor. And then I was kind of saying to myself, well, this is really silly because all those buildings are built. Nobody's going to tear their building down to build some residences. And then people started talking to me saying, hey, that's a really good idea. That would leverage some construction. Some of the existing buildings have second floors that are fairly useless and could be relatively inexpensively converted to residential. Some of the other areas where the parcel is underdeveloped, it would be the leverage that would cause the parcel to be more developable and more financially viable. And then that got me to thinking about, well, if you can do it by conditional use permit in CC, you can do it in mixed use. There's almost no C2 left, so adding that on isn't very problematic. And then the overlay would catch most of H, and we've already talked about the fact that to make downtown viable, it has to be there. So that got almost everything. And then again I don't remember whose point was, the KISS program, keep it simple, so that developers would know what they could do. And what I presented was driven by apartment size and parking, and I don't know necessarily if that's a good idea. It was just an idea, and that's something we'll discuss down the road. And then the last big step for me was the neighborhood convenience, and going, well, if we can do it everywhere else, and if you want these little neighborhood convenience centers to be more economically viable, why not give them the opportunity to put a residential component in if it pencils out for them? Now, realistically, are people going to tear down tons of buildings and do this? No, probably not. Maybe those vacant lots we have in downtown would finally be developed. But I think immediately there are available spaces that we would see converted if it was easy. And I think in future planning you would see people including that residential element because it makes their building pencil out. And what I think the real result will be is that you might have a building now that's tired out, but there's not a financial motivation to change the building because it won't pencil. But if you could stick a floor or two of residential on top of it, now all of a sudden it pencils and it gives people the opportunity to redevelop a property. So for all those good reasons, I still like the idea a lot. Let's start from the right this time.
I like the idea too, Mr. Mayor. No one is going to be, I don't believe anyone's going to be tearing down the buildings. But I think we're opening it up that it provides the opportunity to make maximum use of the property, so I like it.
Not with regard to downtown.
I agree. You know, if you're going to put people above a business, it's done everywhere else in the world and in the state. I don't know why we don't want to do it here.
I don't think we don't. I think we just didn't. I mean, I think that, well, we did. I mean, up until the 60s, we did. And then, what would you call it? Suburban, spread out, build houses. And, you can call it sprawl if you want. I'm not sure that would qualify here, but, I think that was the direction everybody went. And now I think there's a certain amount of pulling back and providing both as an option. Councilmember Costa.
That's an idea that I've definitely always been in favor of, and I'll continue to be in favor of. But please explain to me, you were making a distinction between the downtown area and, no, this was
just kind of a run-on.
So if you could just, again, restate as succinctly as possible what the point you were making, just one more time for me.
I think what I was saying was, the long sentence was, you can have residential above commercial in mixed use today. You can have it in C2 today. The overlay that was considered for H Street, you would have been able to do it. So we already had it on, and the consideration for downtown in the future was that you would be able to do it there with these densities. And so what this did is just give everybody an equal chance. It picked up those last little areas. There's a few blocks of C2 that weren't going to be in the game. And there was some blocks along Ocean that weren't going to be in the overlay. So basically I took what seemed like a good idea and applied it widely across. Now, when we get to the residential density discussion, then we'll be talking about what these densities would be and how that would be looked at. And there are basically kind of two schools of thought, and this is just for future thinking, not for today. Number one is the way it's always been looked at, which is called net dwelling units per acre. And for instance, 7R1, which is residential, is 7 dwelling units per acre. R3 is 21 dwelling units per acre. And that's how mixed use was done, was 21 dwelling units per acre. But mixed use was intended to be more than one floor. Well, the average R3 lot is 7,500 square feet, and at R3, if you were building a full building, you would have 3 2,000 square foot apartments, which doesn't work. And if you wanted to build a 3-story building, you would have, I don't know what you'd have, mansions. And so the approach is to look at those net dwelling units per acre, and the recommendations that are in the general plan are already much higher to make it pencil. But the other way of looking at it, and someone suggested this to me, and you guys can all have it in your head for our next discussion, was instead of talking about dwelling units per acre, you need to leave that to the developer so they decide what they can put on there. And there are basically two restrictions. Number one, we have minimum apartment sizes. And number two, we have a parking requirement. And if you can meet the minimum apartment size and you can meet the parking requirement, you can build what fits on your property. And that's just a different concept. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's just different. So.
Yeah, Marilyn, I think you made a good point with compact urban form, and so I don't see that being an issue as of yet, and again, would like the Planning Commission's recommendation in that regard as well.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Martner? Okay. All right. The next one I think is deals with the industrial or manufacturing uses are not currently permitted in the commercial zones. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because I'm just going to cut to the chase. I think it's a matter of semantics. Does anybody up here want a commercial manufacturing stamping plant in the downtown? Obviously we don't. So it's a matter of, and that dealt with those definitions that the planning staff is going to work with the Planning Commission on. And Lucille, do you have a pretty good idea what we're talking about when we talk about assembly versus manufacturing?
I believe so. You're speaking of small consumer, if you're talking about an electrical, perhaps, building where they're just assembling some very small parts that are not loud or obnoxious. There's no noise there. Again, as we discussed, we already permit it in a jewelry store where they're putting together jewelry, artisans who are creating pottery, that type of thing, can be considered a light type of manufacturing, but it is something that just needs to be identified in your specific definitions.
Something no more intrusive than a retail use.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Martner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the biggest complaints that we hear all the time here is that the staff acts inconsistently in applying these rules. That complaint has come up many times. Why is that complaint come up? Perhaps is because the definitions are not very clear. Perhaps is because the ordinance has a very broad language. Perhaps it is because, members of the staff, members of the public, council members, planning commissioners interpret things in different ways. So this is a prime example where we're going to have to be very, very specific to what is allowed and not allowed. And now that's a long discussion of what's allowed and not allowed. If you leave it vague, you're going to hear the complaints. That's what we hear all the time. Okay? It's why wasn't I granted that and so forth, and somebody else was granted that. So in going into talking about manufacturing, I think that we have to establish a metric that says whether that's allowed or not. You mentioned a couple of things like noise. That's a good metric. Perhaps that is the definition. Certain noise levels at certain time are not allowed, whether it's a jeweler or whether it's a software company or whether it's a computer, whatever. Okay? Noise is a good thing. Traffic, I think, is another one. Traffic from the point of view of circulations. Is there going to be a big truck that is going to come up at 2 o'clock in the morning to deliver goods? Or not? Okay. So I think that's where, just defining what light assembly or what manufacturing is not good enough. It has to be backed by certain regulations. We don't allow this much noise. We don't allow trucks coming in at 2 o'clock in the morning. We don't allow the emission of different smells, whatever, okay? I mean, a bakery might be a problem for some people if they're going to be making bread at 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever. I mean, I'm trying to be a little facetious here. But if we could focus the conversation that way with what is considered to be a nuisance or not a nuisance, then we might go down the right path, and then it will work itself out, who is allowed to go in there or not. Okay? I see it that way, really.
I think those are good points. Councilmember Costa?
Thank you, Mary Lynn. I actually think that that is a great discussion, because I think that way you actually are opening up the uses even more than just having the definition. So I hate to go back to this, but it's really fresh on my mind right now, I'm curious whether City Council feels that, light manufacturing, again, going back to the idea of a microbrewery, would be allowed in these commercial zones or not. For me, I think that they should be when you have a commercial space in the front, to actually sell what's being produced in the back. I think that that's the key component there. But as long as they meet these requirements. So obviously they'd have to be probably small production, they would be artisan, it wouldn't be this huge equipment, and it would have to be tailored to what is required based on these measurables that Council Member Martner stated. So I think that that is a great point. But I just wanted to get some feedback from Council in regards to light manufacturing in commercial zones, and if there needs to be a commercial component of a certain percentage, because as it sits now, is it not 15% is required?
A 15% is generally the accepted amount when you're having any type of manufacturing.
Well,
15% can be used for commercial or for manufacturing?
For retail.
That's in the industrial zone. It can be used for retail. But when you're talking about in the commercial zone,
15% can only be used for that manufacturing. Right, so it's the opposite. So that's something we may need to consider as well, allowing more usage of the square footage for the light manufacturing or assembling or whatever it is, and a smaller amount for the actual retail space or commercial space in the front area. Thank you.
I think, and I agree with that, but I think maybe, excuse me, maybe we could leave the Planning Commission, who has a little more experience, to talk about what those percentages are. And let me throw this idea out, because this was something people had talked to me about, was that, and you just raised the question with the brewery or the bakery, or someone said a tortilla factory, that food uses aren't really, they're production, not manufacturing. And so maybe when you're working on your definitions, it could include assembly or production, and we could wrap food uses together somehow. Do that voodoo that you do with the words. Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to see what the appropriate definitions that are going to be developed. I mean, I really would like to go down that path. And when we get into manufacturing, I mean, there's certain things that could be used to measure this. Noise, you're not going to run 880 volts in. What kind of waste and byproducts is going to be produced by this? Is it something that will fit into a regular garbage can and be collected with everything else, or are we going to have special dumpsters and all that? So, I think that, like we say, we're going into a very definitive area here, and I think maybe we should go ahead and let this last sentence be brought back to us.
Got enough information? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Anything anyone else would like to add at this time on that subject? Okay, the next one will be the discussion of the neighborhood commercial success. And I made a note, but then I forgot to ask Lucille when we were talking. One of the no-nos of zoning is islands, except these neighborhood commercial success zones are all islands. So I'm wondering if, as part of the definition, island centers would be part of the definition of them, which would, number one, talk about what they are and where they could be used if someone wanted to do one in the future, and justify why we do what we did. What do you think?
Well, generally, because they're a compilation of a number of parcels, and they're specifically identified for neighborhood serving uses. They were not really considered spot zoning. You do have a certain, it does make a certain sense in the overall layout, the way they're identified. So we can certainly look at tightening up that definition and the purpose of the zone.
Something along that line. Just the concept that this zone is for those small islands. All them little yellow dots. Yeah, it's for the island centers. Just to make the language a little more understandable. There is one typo in the existing zoning classification, which is the main block down here at the bottom of the page, this block right here. This should be CC and that should be OTC. The bottom of page 4, the previous zones, the second box should be CC and the third box should be OTC. That was just a typo along the way. And then I want to ask I want to reaffirm with the council that our intent is that as the Planning Commission passes each of these things that everybody's working on, they do not come back to us. They will all come back to us as a single entity, which will be the general plan update at that date in October that's been established. So we're not going to see this again after it leaves us today. The Planning Commission's going to deal with it. They're going to pass it, and then it's going to be in the holding pattern until the whole package comes back to us, so the staff doesn't have to deal with these one at a time. Everybody's understanding of that, correct? Okay. Everybody's nodding up and down. Okay, good. Well, yeah. I mean, when they come back to us, we obviously have the ability to make changes as we see fit. But they're not going to come back piecemeal because it's too time-consuming. They're going to come back, and there's too many interlocking pieces that have to be done. Okay. And then now, in the conclusion, we have some questions. Should the Old Town Zone be retained? And we already said yes to that. And the next one we said yes to. And the third one, I think the answer to that is sort of. And I think, yeah, and I think you have, with regard to allowing manufacturing uses in the commercial zones, you have an understanding of where we're trying to get to. And then the last one, dealing with churches. Joe, would you speak to that again? And really what I'm in favor of is following the law. So can you recap one more time what it is that with regard to CUPs and churches?
Wherever a non-church public assembly use is permitted, a church also has to be permitted. And if there are no public assembly uses permitted, but a church is permitted with a CUP, that's okay too.
Okay, and just so we're all on track with it, would you describe some public assembly uses?
Things like community centers, Elks Lodges, any place that a large group can get together.
Theaters, banquet halls?
Yes.
Okay. So, now,
And also, is there an official definition of what a church is? I think we all have a vision what a church is, but if I want to open up an XYZ shop and call it my church, there must be some official definition of what a church is.
It's a bona fide religious group who's performing religious purposes. And it's one of those, that's the best I can do.
Okay, so I can go on the internet and I can become an ordained minister over the internet. Am I now allowed to open up a church?
Maybe.
I think the answer is yes, if in your taxes, I mean, it's all about that. It's what type of business you're running.
Okay.
Okay, so Lucille, let's recap. So everybody's got to focus on the church zones. So, for instance, in our 2 commercial success zones, a church would not require a CUP. If a church wanted to open in an industrial zone, it would require a CUP. And if it wanted to open in a residential zone, it would require a CUP.
That's correct.
Did I miss any zones?
You have the basic zones.
Okay. Is everybody good on all of that? So we can be up with the law. Okay. And the top of page 6, the CUP allows the city to review of hours of operation and compatibility with existing uses. Negative impacts can be dealt with through the Planning Commission when those zones, which would be industrial and residential. And that's how we envision a CUP for a church continuing. That's what we do now. Everybody's good with that. Okay. Is there anything else anyone wants to discuss with regard to this? And I don't see anybody. Lucille, are there any unanswered questions?
No, thank you very much for the direction. I think that provides us with the information that we need to proceed.
Okay, and Teresa, are there any things that you need, or are you all good?
No, we're fine, thank you.
Okay, our meeting for April 24th has been moved to May 1st, and so we've got that handled. Are there any written communications? Okay. Oral communications, your last 2 minutes to talk to us if you didn't get it all before. Seeing no one, we'll close that. And therefore, we are adjourned to a joint meeting with the Beautification Commission on Tuesday, April 17th, 2012 at 6:30 p.m. and a regular council meeting immediately following the joint meeting. Thank you very much for everybody's contribution.